Adam Sandler took his seat politely, greeting those near him, ready for a night of celebration. However, he was not prepared for the confrontation that was about to sweep him. The Oscars had always been a night of glamour, a spectacle where Hollywood's elite came together to celebrate their achievements. But for Adam, it had never been about the flashing cameras or extravagant outfits. His signature laid-back style was something fans adored him for. Comfortable sneakers, oversized hoodies, and baggy shorts, a uniform that made him seem more like a guy you'd grab a burger with than a Hollywood superstar. But apparently, not everyone saw it that way. As the event carried on, the atmosphere seemed lighthearted, until the moment Conan O'Brien took the stage. Hosting for the evening, he had already cracked a few jokes at the expense of other celebrities. But there was something different in the way he turned his attention toward Sandler. With a smirk, Conan took a jab at Adam's outfit, calling attention to his casual look in a way that felt more like an insult than a joke. Was it just an offhand comment meant to get a few laughs, or was there something deeper to it? Had Hollywood's obsession with appearance reached a point where even beloved stars like Sandler weren't safe from ridicule? The audience let out an awkward chuckle, unsure of whether to embrace the joke or wince at how pointed it felt. Adam, however, wasn't laughing. He leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly as if processing what had just been said. Then, with a shift in his posture, he responded. Not with laughter, but with something sharper. There was a certain calmness in his tone, but beneath it, a storm was brewing. He made it clear that he had never cared about Hollywood's obsession with expensive tuxedos and designer suits, nor did he feel the need to conform to an industry that judged people by their appearance more than their talent. He reminded Conan and everyone watching that he had built an empire in comedy without ever changing who he was. But Conan wasn't backing down. He fired back, doubling down on his remarks, implying that the Oscars were a place for class and that Adam's refusal to dress up was a sign of laziness, even disrespect. It was no longer just a joke. It was a challenge. Was this what Hollywood had come to? A place where someone's worth was dictated by whether they wore a bow tie? Did Conan truly believe that Adam Sandler, a man whose films had grossed billions worldwide, needed to prove himself by wearing an overpriced suit? As tension thickened in the room, the audience became divided. Some murmured in agreement with Conan's sentiment, while others felt uneasy at how personal the comments had become. But Adam? He was done playing along. He leaned forward this time, his voice sharper, more deliberate. He questioned Conan's credentials as a host, throwing in a jab about how the only reason he was even standing on that stage was because Hollywood needed someone cheap enough to fill the role. He wasn't going to let a comedian who had spent years failing to stay relevant lecture him on how to dress. He pointed out that Conan's entire persona was built on self-deprecating humor, yet here he was, acting like he was above everyone else. If this was how Hollywood treated people who didn't conform, then maybe the Oscars were just as ridiculous as everyone thought. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was a battle of egos, a confrontation that neither man wanted to back down from. Was this just about a suit, or had Conan exposed the deeper insecurities of an industry obsessed with appearance? And more importantly, was Adam about to take this even further? The audience sat in stunned silence, their laughter now replaced with an awkward tension hanging in the air. Conan, despite the pushback, wasn't ready to retreat. If anything, the confrontation had ignited something in him, a determination to double down, to prove that he wasn't just a comedian, but the voice of Hollywood's so-called standards. He smirked, tilting his head slightly, as if sizing up his opponent. Then, with the calculated precision of someone who knew exactly how to twist the knife, he mocked Adam's entire career. It wasn't just about the outfit anymore. Conan pointed out that Sandler had spent decades coasting on lowbrow humor, churning out films that critics loathed, yet still acting as if he belonged in the same room as real Hollywood. He insinuated that Sandler had only been tolerated Because audiences were willing to waste money on his movies. His words were laced with condescension, as if he were lecturing Adam on what it truly meant to be successful. Adam's expression darkened. He was used to critics, used to snobs in Hollywood dismissing him, but tonight was different. This wasn't some faceless journalist ripping into his movies. This was a man, standing in front of the entire industry, attempting to humiliate him in real time. He could have laughed it off, played the good sport. But why should he? Why should he entertain the idea that Conan had any right to sit in judgment of him? Leaning forward, Adam threw it right back. He didn't need critical acclaim to validate his career. His audience spoke for itself. While Conan had spent his life desperately clinging to late-night television, relying on scripted jokes and celebrity guests to stay afloat, Adam had built something real. His movies, whether people liked them or not, had resonated with millions. He reminded Conan that the Oscars had barely recognized comedy in its history. Yet here he was, acting as if he were the gatekeeper of artistic credibility. The room shifted again, murmurs rippling through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others sat frozen, their eyes darting between the two men as if witnessing a fight they weren't sure how to stop. Conan, for all his bravado, felt the weight of Adam's words. For a split second, he hesitated, his smirk faltering. But rather than conceding, he chose escalation. He accused Adam of being bitter, of resenting the industry that had made him rich. He claimed that Adam was nothing more than a glorified frat boy, a man-child who had never evolved past his Saturday Night Live days. He sneered that Hollywood had given him chances to prove himself, but instead, he had squandered them on lazy comedies and predictable roles. Adam had heard enough. His posture shifted, his patience entirely worn thin. He scoffed at the idea that he needed Hollywood's approval, dismissing the Oscars as nothing more than an empty spectacle, a place where the same people patted each other on the back year after year, while completely ignoring what audiences actually enjoyed. He made it clear that he had never cared for their validation, and tonight only proved why. Then, with the same ease that he had walked into the room, Adam leaned back and let the words that would shake the entire event slip from his mouth. He didn't need the Oscars. He didn't need Conan. And most of all, he didn't need to sit here and entertain the delusions of an industry that had long since lost touch with reality. A stunned silence followed, as if the entire room had momentarily forgotten how to breathe. Had Adam Sandler just dismissed the very event that was meant to celebrate Hollywood's best? And more importantly, was he about to take this even further? Conan's smirk had vanished entirely. His attempt to belittle Adam had backfired, and now the mood in the room had shifted beyond his control. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Instead, there was an uneasy quiet, as if everyone was waiting to see how far this clash would go. But Adam wasn't finished. His frustration had reached a boiling point, and he had no intention of backing down. He laid into Conan, calling out the hypocrisy of Hollywood elites who spent their careers acting superior while thriving off the attention of the very people they mocked. He accused Conan of being just another industry figure desperate to remain relevant, someone who would do anything for a viral moment rather than engage in an actual conversation. Conan bristled at the accusation, his usual quick wit replaced with visible irritation. He attempted to defend himself, throwing out claims that Adam was overreacting, that he was merely joking. But Adam was unmoved. He pointed out that it was always the same excuse. Anytime comedians like Conan crossed the line, they would backpedal and hide behind humor, acting as if their words carried no real weight. He refused to let that slide. The tension escalated when Conan, clearly rattled, took a final shot at Adam's career. He claimed that Adam's work was nothing more than a parade of forgettable performances, that he relied on nostalgia and star-studded friendships rather than actual talent. He scoffed at the idea that Adam had any artistic credibility, dismissing him as a comedian who had failed to evolve. The air in the room thickened, a collective anticipation building. Adam's jaw tightened, his patience worn down to nothing. He had put up with dismissive remarks about his career for years, but tonight was different. Conan had made it personal. Without hesitation, Adam delivered his final blow. He tore apart the notion that he had failed to evolve, reminding Conan that while Hollywood had spent decades pretending comedy wasn't an art form, he had built a career on making people laugh, on creating moments that audiences genuinely enjoyed. He reminded Conan that no matter how many times critics dismissed him, he had never needed their validation. And then, just as the weight of his words settled over the audience, he stood. He made it clear that he was done playing along, that he had no interest in entertaining a room full of people who had already made up their minds about him. Without another glance at Conan, he turned and walked out. The moment Adam left the stage, the silence was deafening. Conan, for all his usual charm and quick comebacks, was left speechless. The audience sat frozen, unsure of how to react. The Oscars had seen its fair share of dramatic moments, but nothing quite like this. Adam Sandler had just walked out on Hollywood's biggest night, and in doing so, he had left a mark that wouldn't be forgotten. As the door swung shut behind Adam Sandler, leaving only the hushed murmurs of an audience unsure of what they had just witnessed, Conan O'Brien's expression shifted. The brief moment of stunned silence gave way to something far more familiar, his signature smirk, the same one that had fueled the entire confrontation from the start. At first he feigned shock, dramatically placing a hand on his chest, as if he had been deeply wounded by Adam's departure. Then, with a shake of his head, he let out a laugh, one that carried more condescension than humor. He turned back to the audience, playing up the theatrics of the situation, making it clear he wasn't about to let Adam have the last word. He ridiculed the idea that Adam Sandler, a man who built his brand on slapstick comedy and juvenile humor, was suddenly taking himself so seriously. He mocked Adam's dramatic exit, exaggerating the way he had walked out as if he were some grand artist who had just been disrespected on the world's biggest stage. With exaggerated gestures, he pretended to storm off himself, mimicking Adam's frustration in the most childish way possible, earning some hesitant laughs from the crowd. Then he dug deeper. He scoffed at Adam's self-righteous speech, mocking the idea that he had built a career based on anything meaningful. He dismissed Adam's claim that he didn't need Hollywood's approval, pointing out that if that were true, he wouldn't have shown up to the Oscars in the first place. He ridiculed the notion that Adam had ever been an outsider, calling him one of the most overpaid, unchallenged stars in the industry, someone who had spent decades making movies that required the bare minimum effort. The audience, sensing Conan's escalating bitterness, responded with a mix of laughter and discomfort. While some seemed to enjoy the host's audacity, others appeared uneasy. Adam may have walked out, but his words had clearly left a dent in Conan's ego. Now, with his guest unable to defend himself, Conan seemed determined to get the last laugh, no matter how desperate it made him look. He continued, doubling down on the insults. He mocked Adam's outfit once again, claiming that even if he had stayed, the Academy would have never taken him seriously. He sneered at Adam's attempts to turn himself into a dramatic actor, calling it laughable that someone who had spent years making lazy comedies now expected people to see him as anything more. The venom in his words was undeniable now, far past playful ribbing. It was personal, but as the cameras panned across the audience, the reaction wasn't what Conan had hoped for. Some were laughing, yes, but others were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The energy in the room had changed. It was one thing to trade barbs with a guest face to face. It was another to take cheap shots after they had already left. For all his bravado, Conan suddenly looked less like the witty host and more like a man desperately trying to save face. He had spent years mastering the art of comedic insults, but tonight his performance felt different. The audience could sense it, the cameras could capture it, and soon enough the headlines would reflect it. Adam Sandler had walked out on the Oscars, but the real loser of the night was standing right there, still talking, still trying to convince the room that he had won.